Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to this. This is my video review on Final Destination 6 Bloodlines. So, if I had to give this movie stars, I would say maybe three and a half. Yeah, 3.5 out of five. I want to say four, but it wasn't. I don't know why I want to say four, but that wasn't my experience. so, but So when I watched the movie, I haven't seen Final Destination 5, so I kind of haven't been keeping up with the new energy of the vibe of the franchise or what it's become. I'm mainly stuck on the first two and I think four. But yeah. So when I came to see this movie, I wasn't really sure what to expect or what it was going to be like. So uh, when I first started watching it, it was So what was weird about the movie is every like 20 minutes or so, it felt like I was watching a different movie. It felt like they had ideas of different scripts and then they just put these fractures of scripts and storylines together every 20 minutes or 25 minutes or so. So like every few minutes, every 20 minutes, I felt like I was watching a different movie. I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying that's a different formula that I'm not used to, and I kind of liked it because it felt like there were so many things that were missing in the story, but because every 20 minutes was so drastically different, whatever it was that was missing, a different 20-minute section of the movie had that, if that makes any sense. So I've never actually experienced a movie that's felt that way. So, I did appreciate that new experience. Um, it leaned. There were some parts that were serious. There were some parts that were heartfelt. Tony Todd made it into this movie before he passed on. They explored him in the lore, the mythology of Final Destination movies. They kind of they. I'm not gonna say they explained, but they did give a very strong, reasoning for him being there. Throughout the movies and stuff. Um, uh, I know a lot of people had their theories about his character, but yeah, I guess I won't go into spoilers about that. But yeah, Tony Todd did make it before he died. It was good to see him again. Um, so this movie did have some lore. It had some comedy bits. It had some heartfelt bits. There were some cheesy bits. So if there's people who watch Final Destination just to laugh at these people die in such silly ways or such gory ways. So they had different elements, they had all those elements sprinkled throughout the movie. So this movie really didn't stick to like a linear type of energy. It was just many different elements of what people liked about the franchise just sprinkled all over the place. The beginning of the movie for me did feel a bit slow. Most of the time, that's not a problem with me, but with me and my brain, I think about how the audience might react to this. So, me, I was fine, but the beginning did feel kind of slow, and I felt like I didn't get to know the characters at all until we got like, a good way into the movie, maybe like an almost an hour, maybe an hour even into the movie. I started to actually feel, like I was getting to know some of the characters. But I also did like that because this character did focus on a theme of family. And, when you are looking into family dynamics and, family members and stuff, there's certain chemistries. And sometimes there's this character who's like, who is that? Is that a stepsister? Is that a cousin? Is that you don't really know. Um, so I did like how you got to see the chemistry between the family members and just how they interacted with each other before you fully got to know who the characters were. So I did enjoy that, how that was also different. So this movie did feel kind of fresh when in different ways that it was produced. I know a lot of people don't notice small details like that, but like for someone like me who's just loved to just look and study movies all the time, I can see very, very subtle differences in the production of movies. and when new elements are introduced and when they're not produced, and things like that. And now a lot of people will say, "Oh, all movies are the same," or "All movies in this franchise are the same." But I really look at the details that really stand out, that make this like, oh man, this is actually a game changer in movie productions. There's a whole universe when making movies, and I saw a lot of that expansion, universal expansion in this movie when it came to just movie making in general, and the franchise also, of Final Destination. But I know a lot of people may see this as, oh, there's another planet. It's like, okay, you're seeing planets when you look at movies or consuming media, but you have people like me who see an entire universe and stars and color gases, stuff like that. Anyway, I'm just saying all that because for anyone who is interested in looking at the smaller details of movies, um, you can look at the smaller details in this movie and you can see a lot of things that were you may have never seen before when it came to how certain events happened in this movie, or how certain deaths of the characters were built up, and I really really appreciated that a lot. There was one thing about this movie that I didn't really like, or I did like, but I just had a slight problem with, and that was when the character who had the premonition in this movie, she was able to look around and predict how a death was going to happen, and then it happened, but not to the person she thought it was going to happen to. So I was wondering, like, oh snap, so the people who have these premonitions throughout the movies, can they actually can they actually explain, just like in Death Note, can they actually create the scenario of how a character dies? So I think, so another thing that made this movie amazing was that there was little droplets, or like little seeds like that were placed in this movie, that actually it could really far expand Final Destination. So it was that idea that maybe, um, these scenarios of when death happens can actually be created, can actually be written down, or actually be talked about, or um, things like that. Having a connection of death. What if the person who has the premonitions connects to death and can actually feel death's emotions and intentions and his plans, and actually maybe talk about how the plans might happen, but what if she actually influences how death does it? And then maybe characters can find a way to, counteract it or something. So that's an idea for a future Final Destination. And also, there was this idea of, if one person who's on the list of death actually kills somebody, they can actually get the time that that person had left. That's been a mythology of death for a while. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about other movies and shows, but that's been a mythology of death and other lores and shows and books and stuff. So that's an interesting idea for a Final Destination, of a serial killer who was actually on death's list, and they actually go around killing people because they're trying to avoid death. I don't know how they would write that, but there's like a seed of an idea there. Um, yeah, so right before Tony Todd actually passed away, before he died in real life, the actor, he was in this movie, and he did give a very potent message about what the Final Destination movies were about, especially in the older ones. So I did appreciate that he was able to deliver that line of, this is a deeper message of Final Destination. There you go, boom. Um, I loved that this was a dysfunctional. It was a family movie, but not in family movie as in like, oh, happy, vacation type family. It was a family movie that was expressed through a Final Destination title. So I do really like that. I liked that you actually got a feel of real dysfunction in family, and then you see how it all falls apart, even though it's still dysfunctional. It wasn't just everyone was happy and together, things went bad. It was things were always bad, things were always dysfunctional, and just even though it was all dysfunctional, all this chaos happened, and they just got to figure it out through the dysfunction. And I really like that about this movie too. Um, yeah, so it was some good comedy. Yep, starts off slow. Um, I thought the deaths were pretty cool. There was a section that was a bit silly. I don't know how the fans would react to that scenario. It was, but I think there was a silly part when they're in the hospital. There's a hospital, and that was actually in the second movie, and they actually recreate the time. They not recreate, but have little inklets, little bits of detail that actually reconnect Final Destination 2 into this one. And I believe the hospital from the second movie was in this one. I don't know if they filmed it there, but I think it was the same hospital. And while they were in there at that hospital for Final Destination 2, um, these two characters were like, well, what if we do what they did in Final Destination 2, sort of like putting the characters in the head of the audience. They're just like, what if we actually kill a character that's supposed to die on the list, but then what if they end up coming back? And what if we actually try to purposefully do that? What would that look like? What would that be like? I know a lot of people will think that's stupid, that's a silly idea, but then you have other people who are like, why don't they just like kill somebody and then bring them back? That would be funny, right? So this movie actually does explore that idea in one section, and I really do admire that. Thought that was really cool to actually see movies that do stuff like that. That really, horror movies that do stuff like that, where audience members have a joke about a horror movie. Why don't they just do that? And newer horror movies are actually taking those pieces that audiences are saying, and they're putting it in these movies and actually exploring it. And even though it seems silly, they're doing it, and I appreciate that about modern day horror movies. Um, for me, the acting was okay, the actors were okay. Okay. So last two things I will say. Um, From what I understand, this movie does connect all the movies together because there's a flashback of the past of, I believe, the 50s or something. And there was an event that happened, and there was a whole thing about this penny. And this penny was in the water, and this kid took the penny out. And I don't know too much about this kid, but this little butt of a kid pulls his penny out. He's told not to, but he does anyway. And this penny ends up causing the entire first beginning of the movie, the entire first disaster to happen and kill all these people. So when that happens, I'm not sure how the penny evolves and gets, the penny, whatever. Someone takes it and grabs it, and they jump ahead into the modern day 2020s, and someone has the penny with them. They locked it away, then the penny fell out and ended up causing a whole nother disaster. So that was interesting that they used this penny, this physical object, as a representation of, the beginning of death, but also like the ending of death. That was like his little totem or whatever. This also connects because I guess so they didn't really explain this, but it was sprinkled in there, was hinted that the first event that happened in the 50s may have actually been the start of death's list. That's actually where this manifestation actually started, was in the 50s during this event. And what happened was these characters that actually survived death was like kind of targeting those individuals that are kind of, spread, went their separate ways or whatever. So kind of got into that mythology that these random characters throughout the Final Destination movies were actually connected in some way through the first event. and that's why they're actually targeted by death in such an intense way. So I did appreciate that. Um, but yeah, so I love this movie. It was a great movie. I loved it. I'll say it's a 4 out of 5. Those are what my instincts are telling me. Like I said, the beginning was a little bit slow. There were some slow parts in the middle, but overall, it was a fun movie. A lot of times when I look at movies, I look at them as if I'm reading a book, and I say, okay, now if I'm actually reading a book and my imagination is, going through the story, what would it be like? So I love watching movies, especially modern day movies that aren't visuals like Transformers or, Marvel movie, whatever, superhero movies. But I love watching movies and just thinking about what if I was reading this right now? Would this actually be a good book? Would this actually be a good story? So every time I watch a movie, I think about that. And so I think about where the character starts off at and how they're narrating and how the story evolves around the main characters and just how characters are introduced and things like that. So yeah, so I had a great time with that. Thank you again for listening to this, and you have a wonderful day.